7 things you need to do if you want wide shoulders. The lateral deltoid is, without a doubt, one of the most important muscles for those seeking that impressive physique. It is responsible for creating that width in the shoulders that we so admire, that V silhouette that completely transforms the aesthetics of the body. This width creates a powerful visual illusion that makes the waist appear slimmer, the body more athletic and stronger, no matter how much you work your chest, back, or arms. Without wide shoulders, the physique simply doesn't reach its maximum potential. The problem is that about 90% of people don't know exactly how to stimulate this muscle correctly. They're there, week after week, doing lateral raises any which way, without making real progress, becoming frustrated with the lack of results. That's why today you'll see 7 tips that will make you truly activate the lateral deltoid and finally have wide shoulders. Before getting into the tips, we need to talk about the main mistake that practically everyone makes when training shoulders. I'm talking about the trapezius stealing the movement. Have you ever noticed how easy it is during a lateral raise to let your shoulders rise and the trapezius take control? I must say that this happens, unfortunately, most of the time because of ego. People are always looking to lift more weight, thinking that load progression exclusively means increasing the weight, and they sacrifice proper technique. It's even worse when they do it thinking they're impressing others at the gym. The problem is that when the trapezius takes over the work, your lateral deltoid practically takes a vacation. With each repetition dominated by the trapezius, you're losing growth potential. Physiologically, what happens is the following. The trapezius is a much stronger and more dominant muscle than the lateral deltoid. It will always try to help when the movement gets difficult. It's a natural response from the body to recruit larger muscles when smaller ones begin to fail. If you're not consciously avoiding this, your brain will automatically transfer the load to the trapezius. To correct this, you first need to accept a truth. You'll probably have to decrease the weight. Yes, your ego will hurt a little, but the results will compensate for everything. Keep your shoulders down and back throughout the entire movement, as if you were holding a coin between your shoulder blades. Focus on feeling exclusively the lateral deltoid working. A valuable trick is to think about pushing the weight out with your elbow, not with your hand. This automatically activates more of the deltoid and less of the trapezius. Having corrected this basic error, let's move on to what you need to do to hypertrophy the lateral shoulder. Tip number 1. Vary the force vector. Think about this. When you do the traditional lateral raise with dumbbells, gravity is pulling the weight down, right? The problem is that, in the initial position of the movement, when your arms are at your sides, the tension on the lateral deltoid is practically zero. It only starts to increase as you raise your arms, and that means you're losing a valuable part of the stimulus potential. This is where the beauty of force vector variation comes in. When you do the lateral raise with a cable, for example, the force isn't just pulling down, but also to the side or forward, depending on where you position yourself. This creates constant tension in the muscle, from the beginning to the end of the movement. Have you noticed how different the sensation is? How it seems more difficult, even with a lighter weight? From a biomechanical point of view, in the lateral raise with a dumbbell, the perpendicular distance between the point of articulation and the line of action of the force is smaller at the beginning of the movement, making this part easier. In the cable, the lever arm is more constant throughout the entire movement. And we know from training science that maintaining constant tension is a powerful stimulus for hypertrophy. Another variation with a lot of potential is the lateral raise lying on an incline bench, but we'll talk more about that later. Tip 2. Partial repetitions. You know that intense burning we feel when we approach muscle failure? That's when the magic starts to happen. When you reach the point where you can no longer complete a full repetition, your instinct tells you to drop the weight and rest. But when it comes to the lateral deltoid, we're leaving gains on the table by doing this. Partial repetitions are a powerful technique that allows you to take your muscle beyond the normal limit. It works like this. When you can no longer do a complete lateral raise, instead of giving up, continue doing the movement with a smaller range of motion. Maybe you can only raise your arm halfway up. No problem, do it until there. When even that's no longer possible, reduce the range even more. By doing this, what happens physiologically is that you're recruiting different muscle fibers and taking them to total exhaustion, creating additional micro-tears that, when recovered, result in superior muscle growth. A study published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research showed that extending the set beyond concentric failure with partial repetitions significantly increased muscle activation and metabolic stress, two important triggers for growth. The accumulation of lactate and other metabolites during this process creates an even more favorable hormonal environment for muscle development. Here's an effective way to implement this in your training. In your last set of lateral raises, after reaching failure with complete repetitions, usually between 8 to 12, immediately do 5 to 8 partial repetitions in the upper half of the movement. When you can no longer do that, do another 5 to 8 repetitions in the upper quarter of the movement. An important detail: partial repetitions work better when the muscle is already pre-exhausted. Therefore, I recommend applying them in the final sets of each exercise, not the first ones. This maximizes fiber recruitment and growth stimulus. Tip 3. Know how to work with a good movement cadence. There's a fundamental difference between simply lifting weight and training a muscle. Many people, unfortunately, are just lifting weight. They throw the dumbbell up with momentum and let it fall quickly, losing all the stimulus in the negative phase of the movement. It's in the eccentric phase that the greatest damage to muscle fibers occurs, especially when the cadence is controlled. Think about it. It's not just about lifting the weight from point A to point B. It's about how you make that journey. From a physiological point of view, during the eccentric phase, the cross bridges of actin and myosin, the structures responsible for muscle contraction, are literally torn away from each other, creating micro-ruptures in the fibers. It's this controlled damage that, during the recovery process, leads to muscle growth. When you lower the weight quickly, you're essentially wasting this stimulus potential. A technique that transformed my training in lateral raises was adopting the 1-to-3 cadence, raising the weight in 1 second and lowering it in 3. This forces you to completely control the movement, eliminating any momentum or cheating. In the first workouts with this technique, you'll probably have to reduce the weight, and that's okay. Over time, your strength in the eccentric phase will improve, and you can progressively increase. Another benefit of this approach is that it practically eliminates the risk of injuries. Most shoulder injuries happen due to sudden or uncontrolled movements. With a controlled cadence, you keep the muscle under constant tension and protect the joints. This is especially important for the shoulder complex, which is one of the most injury-prone joints in the human body. Additionally, training with controlled cadence significantly improves your mind-muscle connection. When you move slowly, especially in the eccentric phase, you have time to really feel the muscle working. This increased body awareness allows you to make subtle adjustments in technique and maximize lateral deltoid activation, minimizing the involvement of accessory muscles like the trapezius. Tip 4. Mechanical overload in a stretched position. This is an advanced strategy that very few people know about or apply. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Having constant access to correct and science-based information is what will make you progress in the long term in the world of bodybuilding. The lateral deltoid, in most conventional workouts, is rarely worked in its maximum stretch position. When your arms are at your sides during a lateral raise, the muscle is completely relaxed, right? Recent research in exercise science shows that creating tension in the muscle when it's in a stretched position is an extremely potent trigger for hypertrophy. This stimulates the synthesis of new myofibrils in a way that conventional training cannot. When a muscle is in its most stretched position, the contractile proteins are at their point of greatest stretch. Applying load in this position creates a unique stimulus that triggers a cascade of molecular signaling, leading to an increase in the size and number of myofibrils. A study published in the European Journal of Applied Physiology demonstrated that training with emphasis on the stretched phase promoted significantly greater hypertrophy gains compared to conventional training, even when the total volume was equivalent. Okay, enough science. How do you do this? There are two excellent techniques. The first is to do lateral raises lying on your side on a bench. In this position, when the arm is close to the body, the deltoid is already under tension, even being the point of greatest stretch. Gravity pulls the arm down, creating resistance precisely in the position where there would normally be little or no tension. The second option, as we've already mentioned, is to do lateral raises with cables crossed behind your back. This movement creates an incredible pre-tension in the muscle before you even start the raise. When the cables are crossed behind you, the lateral deltoid is already being stretched and tensioned simultaneously, a perfect combination to stimulate growth. Another variation that I love is the lateral raise with a forward lean. By inclining the trunk about 15 to 20 degrees forward, you slightly modify the angle of action of the lateral deltoid, creating more tension in the stretched position. An important detail: when working the muscle in a stretched position, use lighter weights than usual. The unfavorable mechanical leverage and additional stress on the muscle fibers make the movement much more challenging. Start with 50 to 60% of the weight you would normally use and gradually increase as you adapt. Tip 5. Peak muscle contraction. Have you heard the expression squeeze the muscle? That's the essence of peak contraction. When you reach the top of the movement in a lateral raise, instead of immediately starting the descent, maintain the position for 3 seconds, contracting the lateral deltoid with the maximum possible intensity. What happens at this moment is fascinating. You're creating a temporary blood occlusion in the muscle, increasing the concentration of metabolites and amplifying the growth stimulus. From a physiological point of view, the peak contraction maximizes the recruitment of motor units, the neurons that control muscle fibers. The more motor units you can recruit, the greater the growth potential. Additionally, this intense isometric contraction generates additional metabolic stress, increasing the production of local anabolic hormones that promote hypertrophy. The science behind this is solid. A study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology demonstrated that adding isometric contractions at the point of greatest tension in the movement significantly increased muscle activation measured by electromyography. Furthermore, this pause at the top of the movement has another incredible benefit. It almost completely eliminates the possibility of using the trapezius to steal the movement. When you force yourself to hold the contraction, any compensation becomes obvious. You simply cannot maintain an isometric position for 3 seconds if you're not using the correct muscle. Many advanced practitioners use a technique called progressive contraction, where they increase the intensity of the contraction over the 3 seconds. They start with a moderate contraction and intensify until reaching the maximum possible in the last second. This creates an even more potent and differentiated stimulus for the muscle fibers. Tip 6. Do drop sets. Okay, of course you've heard of drop sets, but if there's an intensity technique that seems to have been created specifically for the lateral deltoid, that technique is the drop set. The concept is simple. You perform a set to failure with a certain weight, immediately reduce the weight, usually by 30 to 40%, and continue without rest. Why does this work so well for the lateral deltoid? First, this muscle has a fiber composition that responds exceptionally well to high volume and metabolic fatigue. Drop sets create exactly this environment. Second, the lateral deltoid is relatively small and recovers quickly between sets, which means we can really destroy it with intensity techniques without compromising the rest of the workout. From a physiological point of view, drop sets are a powerful tool to completely deplete muscle glycogen and maximize muscle fiber recruitment. When you reach failure with a certain weight, some fibers are already fatigued, but others still have residual capacity. By reducing the weight and continuing immediately, you can recruit these remaining fibers, taking the muscle to total exhaustion. Additionally, drop sets create a highly favorable metabolic environment for hypertrophy. The accumulation of lactate and other metabolites signals to the body that an adaptation is necessary. It's almost as if you were creating a muscle emergency. Your body perceives that it needs to build more muscle to deal with this type of stress in the future. A particularly effective way to implement drop sets for the lateral deltoid is what I call the descending ladder. Start with a weight with which you can do about 8 to 10 repetitions. When you fail, reduce by 20% and continue. Then reduce by another 20% and continue until you complete 3 to 4 steps. To maximize effectiveness, combine drop sets with one of the other techniques we mentioned earlier, such as peak contraction or controlled cadence. For example, do a drop set, but maintain the 3-second pause at the top of each repetition. This combination of techniques creates a truly brutal stimulus that your lateral deltoid will have no choice but to respond to with growth. Tip 7. Work the lateral shoulder twice a week. Training frequency is a crucial factor that many neglect. If you're dedicating only one day of the week to shoulder training, with perhaps 2 exercises for the lateral deltoid, that's simply not enough for optimal growth. Muscle protein synthesis, the process that effectively builds new muscle tissue, remains elevated for approximately 36 to 48 hours after an intense workout. After that, the stimulus decreases significantly. This means that if you train shoulders only on Monday, by Wednesday, your body is no longer in muscle-building mode for this area. Of course, you activate the anterior deltoid in many chest exercises, but here we're focused on the lateral deltoid. Now imagine splitting your weekly volume into 2 workouts. You could, for example, train on Monday and Thursday, keeping your lateral deltoid in an anabolic state practically all week long. I'm not talking about doubling the total volume, but strategically distributing it. But what about going beyond? Instead of doing 2 identical workouts, we can manipulate the variables to maximize results. I suggest dividing it like this. In the first workout of the week, focus on neural strength with mechanical tension. This means heavier series, strategic drop sets, and emphasis on peak contraction. In the second workout, we change the focus to volume and metabolic stress, longer series, with more repetitions, isometric work, partials, and controlled cadence. This approach creates a complete stimulus, attacking different hypertrophy mechanisms throughout the week. Recent research shows that there are multiple signaling pathways for muscle growth, some responding better to heavy loads, others to high volume, others to metabolic stress. For those with a very busy routine, a practical option is to add a mini workout of lateral deltoid on another day of the week. For example, if you already train back on Wednesday, add 2 to 3 sets of lateral raises at the end of that workout. It's just 5 more minutes, but at the right time of the week, it can make a significant difference in long-term results. And remember, don't try to apply everything at once. Start incorporating 1 or 2 techniques per week, observe how your body responds, and adjust as necessary. Remember that muscle growth is a marathon, not a 100-meter sprint. And to complete your V-shape, after building wide shoulders, we need a wide back. That's why we've left a video appearing right now on the screen showing a complete back workout, based on science, with just 4 exercises. Don't miss it. Thank you for watching this far, and may God bless you, my friend.